Without a doubt, today's film features some absolutely incredible stunts, one of which even gained a Guinness Book of World Record status. But speaking of a true Fall Guy, if any of you happen to be at the Universal City Walk seeing Rogue One in IMAX Saturday night on opening weekend and noticed during the final credits as everybody was exiting the theater, there happened to have been one fat man in a hat falling down the stairs but managing to protect his Rogue One collectible popcorn tin by allowing his body to take all of the impact of those tall IMAX stairs, so his precious popcorn tin, which now years later he can't even find, wouldn't get harmed as he fell down the stairs. This particular stunt performer was then able to stand up and limp out and try and pretend it never happened, and since his family was in front of him exiting quicker, they didn't notice and he got away with it up until the point in the lobby when somebody walked up and asked him if he was okay. So if you saw that, I hope you appreciated the greatness that you witnessed and how every stunt, no matter how graceful it seems, has lots of pain actually associated with it. Sorry, what were we talking about? Yes, the Fall Guy. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, we have a doozy for you today. We have Drew Pearce, the screenwriter of The Fall Guy. Yes, the film based on the 1980s TV show, and it is in theaters today, folks, and it is actually quite a pleasure to watch. And I gotta say, it's fantastic to have Drew back in the podcast, and what was fun to discuss was that Drew grew up watching The Fall Guy. But now, as he's writing the feature version of it, he knew that it was okay to give up the format of the original 80s show in place of making something more filmic. And what he did was he made a really hilarious roller coaster ride of a film that I hope you'll go see this weekend. Without a doubt, Drew was very forthcoming about his creative process and what it took to get The Fall Guy written and made, so I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I want to take a moment and thank today's sponsors of screencraft.org, finaldraft.com, and Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. Breaking into Hollywood as an aspiring writer can be a confusing, convoluted business. Fortunately, Screencraft helps writers with both the craft of writing and the business of filmmaking. Screencraft.org has everything for your writing journey, from video lectures of your favorite writers like Tony Gilroy and J.J. Abrams to hands-on career coaching with their writer development team. Screencraft's genre-specific screenwriting competitions feature judges that include Oscar-winning screenwriters and top literary reps that really know their storytelling. Hundreds of past winners and finalists have started their career with the direct support of Screencraft, and Screencraft winners have been staffed on shows at Netflix, Amazon, Apple TV, ABC, and Paramount Plus, and they have sold scripts and been hired to write films for Universal, Netflix, Lionsgate, Blumhouse, Hulu, and many more. And speaking of contests, the Screencraft Action Adventure Screenplay Competition is now open until June 30th, 2024. And if you want to enter it with your screenplay, you could use coupon code QA Podcast, all one word. QA Podcast will save you 10% off a standard entry. But remember, you have till June 30th, 2024 to enter the Action Adventure Screenplay Competition and use coupon code QA Podcast, all one word, to save 10% on your standard entry. So folks, if you're an aspiring writer, check out Screencraft over at screencraft.org. Of course, before you enter a contest, you gotta write your script first, and Final Draft 13 was recently released, and it's the newest version of the industry standard screenwriting software. In fact, Final Draft is used by 95% of the film and television community, along with the screenwriting pros like Aaron Sorkin, Guillermo del Toro, James Cameron, and Sofia Coppola, just to name a few. There's new and improved features in Final Draft 13 that include character development tools, more ways to customize your writing environment, set character goals, track your progress, and more. And now you could save 25% off an upgrade or purchase of Final Draft 13 on a special sale that's going on right now and ends on May 6th, 2024. You don't need a code. All you need to do is visit finaldraft.com and either do a purchase of Final Draft 13 or an upgrade to Final Draft 13 if you're a previous user, and that 25% savings will populate in your cart online. Final Draft makes formatting a screenplay easy, so you could focus on what you do best: writing. So, folks, if you're looking to purchase or upgrade to Final Draft 13, make sure you do it by May 6, 2024 to save 25%. And of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you'll check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. You can read us on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad version, Backstory. Of course, you could always see what's inside Backstory Magazine by looking in our table of contents, and you will notice that it is our Oscar issue that is still our current issue here in May 2024. And guess what? That's okay. We are a digital magazine, and we keep updating the magazine with new film and TV interviews as we go on until our next issue hits. So just next week, for instance, you'll be seeing a Star Wars Bad Batch finale article that is filled with spoilers, giving insight into some of the most important scenes. And then following that, there'll even be a Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes article that has spoiler details as well. We're always updating the magazine. There's always new content, and we hope you'll consider supporting independent journalism and join us in reading it. If you've never read us before, I hope you check out our free issue. And if you like what you see, and I hope you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. So look, it really would mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube channel, which is where you could see zooms of all these interviews, including today's, especially when Drew is in his office and points to different posters and shows us his Fall Guy car. But nonetheless, the Backstory Magazine YouTube watchers as well, I'm counting on all of you to consider becoming subscribers and support independent journalism, which includes this passion project. But now, without any further ado, let's just get right into the interview with screenwriter Drew Pearce, who is here to discuss his latest film, The Fall Guy, which is in theaters today, and I hope you go see it because, as I said, it is a hilarious roller coaster experience of a film that deserves to be seen on the big screen. Drew, it's great to see you. It's been a hot minute. You know, we did that great Iron Man 3 screening and podcast like many moons ago, and I guess that's a place to start. Like, what would you say was, looking back all these years later, a lesson that you learned on Iron Man 3, which you co-wrote, that it was just a really fun film and it had a great sense of humor about it, which is something very consistent in your work?
It feels like so long ago. It's 10 years ago, a decade, right? It's basically my whole career, because Iron Man was remarkably the first on-screen credit I ever got for a movie, right? What's been really strange, like doing the press for Fall Guy, partly because Fall Guy is about movies, is the realization that even though it feels like so long ago, it's taken kind of 5 years to get The Fall Guy made, which is quick for a big movie. And so really, Iron Man 3 is only 2 Fall Guys ago. So I'm having a really strange, like, kind of like temporal kind of existence at the moment. You know, Iron Man 3 was just like the most insane learning curve for me. Also, so many things happened on that movie that I assumed were always the way and then are never the way. For example, you know, it's taken a decade to be on a big movie where I'm the same person at the end of the film that I was at the beginning, you know. But I assumed at the time, hey, me and Shane were on it for 2.5 years. Nobody else ever touched a keyboard. No big. Obviously, it turns out that is not common in the world of tentpoles. The thing that I hoped for when I went into Iron Man, and which Shane Black, you know, really underlined for me, is that idea of not being reductive when you're making a big film, like smuggling ideas in. You know, Shane would always talk about making sure there were as many flavors in the pot as possible. You know, and I think that what I'm kind of proud of is I think The Fall Guy lives up to that. I also think what's interesting is, you know, Iron Man 3 is a pretty weird blockbuster, and in its own way and charming way, I think and hope that The Fall Guy is too. And I'm really proud of them kind of as a bookend of the decade, honestly.
Well, you know, it's interesting because Fall Guy, obviously Iron Man 3, Hobbs and Shaw, you have a knack of really writing characters with swagger, you know, and you do it well. You do it well. And it kind of is that big blockbuster feel that not all movies have, because it's a hyper reality. You know, the audience is in on it. The audience is with them, seeing the irony that they see. It's not exactly reality, but it's darn close.
It might be a British person in America thing. I mean, I've lived here for 12 years now. Any big movie, any action movie, frankly, most movies in general, I need the lead character to be an underdog for me to care about them.
Sure.
And part because, like, I come from a working class background. Like, you know, I am kind of allergic to to privilege in my leads, which is crazy when you consider that I've written Tony Stark, who arguably is the most privileged man in American movies. And also that for all of these people, you're trying to create an underdog out of Ryan Gosling, the most charming and handsome man in the world. That is a trick. That is a sleight of hand, right? There are a bunch of ways of doing it, but I think weirdly the Britishness of self-depreciation might actually be relatively helpful for like imbuing their swagger with something that kind of undercuts it and stops it sounding or feeling arrogant. I think if you write the characters straight ahead, then it's very hard for them to feel sympathetic, honestly. And I think in the case of Gosling and the Fall Guy, a lot of people keep asking me about, and we should talk about it, of course, but the kind of film in the film and the using the word meta and stuff like that. For me, the way I approached the script wasn't as like a movie about the entertainment industry. What I wanted to do was like make a blue collar movie. I felt like that was what was really interesting about the idea of a stuntman. I mean, it's literally coded in the song, right? The unknown stuntman. And that felt to me like we could get at something universal that like spoke to the culture now as well. A world where faceless, nameless people like aren't represented in the media, for example, but do jobs and have lives whose value is still like massive to our culture, And I think in a strange way, like stuntmen and women become a bit of a metaphor for just like a classic like 70s or 80s blue collar kind of blockbuster. And again, we don't see those very much. Maybe that's because, we've been in the much vaunted like, epoch of superheroes, etc. Right. But like there's something really beguiling about as I say, it's kind of the background I come from. Putting people that do a job in the middle of a big movie is kind of satisfying.
On that note, I'm curious what kind of influences you had for this, because obviously there's 1980s, The Stuntman, there's Hooper, there's Drive, where Gosling is a stuntman by day and, Getaway Driver by night. Tarantino's Death Proof, even the 1980s movie FX, like the 80s, from the 80s.
FX Murder by Illusion is a huge influence on this movie.
I love that movie.
As is FX2, which is also very good.
They're so good.
I mean, it's great that we get to stretch out and talk about this a little bit. So obviously the stuntmen in movies is actually a really wide-ranging thing. Like, an homme et une femme is like a love story with a stuntman, Okay. It's like you will find them peppered through. Now, obviously you have the absolute, the undeniables of the genre. Hooper is obviously, and at various points there have been far more direct references to Hooper in the Fall Guy script, including like Winston's character having a gold helmet that he used to smash something and get some stuff out of. Stuntman is, of course, just a brilliant film, just like hands down, beautiful. And there's a direct reference in our film to that. The unbroken oneer at the beginning of our movie is where you even like change levels, is a direct reference to the one that's in The Stuntman, where he, gets on the cherry picker at the Dell down in San Diego. I love the tradition of stunt guys in movies. What is interesting about them as a lead in an action film is you get to create a world that is a bit less hyper-realistic because their skill set directly relates to doing action. So it's an interesting place to kind of work out where the movie's relationship to reality is. Because actually, if you're making a movie about a stuntman as a lead, you kind of have to trick the audience into thinking no stunts are taking place in the film because you want them to feel the danger of the character rather than, wait. You're showing us how we do all the stunts anyway. Why should we be excited by this? So there's a really tricky, like kind of snake brain trick that you have to kind of pull off with this.
Well, and it works either way because, audiences have been used to lead characters as stuntmen going all the way back to, Charlie Chaplin.
I was going to say,
Chaplin or Buster Keaton right at the beginning of cinema. But here you have the stunts that are taking place in the movie within the movie and the making of these movies. But also you're expecting that in the real world, quote unquote, that Colt is able to overcome things because of his stunt expertise. So it works because you buy into the concept. Like, there's nobody that has a suspension of disbelief issue watching this movie. You know what I mean?
But that's what's fun, right? It was a balance in the edit. The first major stunt in the movie is the cannon roll, which is a legit world record stunt. And however you cut that cannon roll, that is a dangerous fucking stunt, and nobody would want to be in that car. Do you know what I mean? Right. And also, it's not like there's a rig on a cannon roll. There's a big thing that blows out through the bottom, but like, you are rolling a car. There's a bunch of other things in this movie where there were harnesses digitally removed, etc., because of course there were. But I think having the cannon roll first, whether by design or not, like, does manage to like imbue a true sense of danger in the stunt job that then you just kind of go with. But my favorite thing about it being a stuntman is actually the other side of that, which is that the character's emotional flaw is because he's a stuntman, is because his job is the thumbs up, because his job is taking a beating and saying, no, it didn't hurt. And like, I love that is the character's romantic flaw, because I think that allows us to have this kind of like the masculinity of stuntman, but also have it be kind of the issue as well.
I want to get into the spoilers in a second, but one thing that really worked here that I think is part of the secret sauce that people might not notice is, yes, this is an ensemble film, but your secret sauce is actually a low character count. You have
hugely low character count.
And it like really gets people more immersed in your characters by keeping a low character count, not getting too lost in the conspiracy, the side characters of, and we'll get into them more later, of Gail, the producer, Tom, the actor, Dan, the stunt coordinator, even Alma, the assistant to Tom.
Yeah.
Like, that's your little circle. And that works perfectly because we know who those characters are. They play pretty quick in the audience's mind, which gives you more time to really focus on what's going on between Colt and Jody.
Those two people at the center of this movie. And the great thing, of course, is those two people are Gosling and Blunt. There is I have not seen anyone on screen with their chemistry in years. I honestly haven't. And it was there from the dailies. It was there from like the first day she stepped on set. And that's just a gift, right? Like, that's the greatest special effect in the whole movie is what they have when they're on screen together. And I think that allows you to kind of pare back the rest of the movie as you go, right? And we shot more with everyone. And also we kind of evolved the movie even as we were shooting. And some of that was because what we were getting was such gold between Gosling and Blunt. I used every trick in the book to try and get them to meet each other as many times as possible during that second act, even though technically there is no way they should actually meet during that second act. That's where you have to take a step back and go, we're not making Mission Impossible. We're trying to make a Billy Wilder movie, hidden inside a Mission Impossible movie. So let's go back to the drawing board. Let's go watch it happen one night. Let's find all the tricks that we possibly can. And honestly, it's the thing I'm proudest of is my favorite version of the movie is like watching those Emily and Ryan scenes. And they're not even weirdly that melodramatic as a relationship. They're quite kind of low key.
Yeah.
Nobody is like, sure, she sets him on fire, but in the line of her work. And more importantly, like, their problem isn't presented as grand opera, right? It's not like he would kill himself without her or anything else. They are sad because they had a thing and then something bad happened and then they lost that thing that they had. And they spend the movie in a very human, very grown-up way trying to kind of piece that back together. And that is the thing I'm honestly most proud of in the whole film, is those kind of little stepping stones of like quite a grown-up relationship.
Well, yeah, you don't see it as often because rather than it being a love story, it's a rekindling of a love story. He's trying to win her back, and he's earnest about it from the beginning, and she's hesitant because she doesn't want to get hurt. So, I mean, that really tracks. So I'm going to ask you a couple lightning bolt fast questions so then we could get to the spoiler section, but I've got to ask them because it's about your craft. When you sat down to outline this, when you first came on, did you start with an outline? Did you start with note cards? What was your original iteration like on paper?
Honestly, it's pretty much identical every single film. This one specifically started by me, because we didn't have an idea. We had, shall we do something with the Fall Guy? Kelly, the producer, and Dave, the director, weren't really sure what they wanted to do with it. And one of the things they had me explore was like a big Mission Impossible style, like globe-trotting team movie. I did like a kind of 5-pager on that. And I did a 5-pager on the one that kind of, truthfully, I wanted most, which was something that felt far more influenced by, whisper it, noir. The thing you're not allowed to say. Specifically like kind of fuzzy 70s noir. If you take a step back from the Fall Guy, it really is like The Long Goodbye or one of those like Shaggy Dog Altman-esque or Altman-ish investigative stories. You have classically an investigator in the middle of this movie who's not very good at doing it. And obviously, that mantle was then taken up brilliantly by the aforementioned Mr. Shane Black, and he's kind of the master of that in the 90s. But that was the movie I really wanted to make, and it was exciting when Dave and Kelly let us go in that direction. And then Ryan, as you might imagine, with that kind of story, Ryan like totally embraced it, and that's kind of how we found our through line. But then, so process-wise, okay, that's the story. I have my 5-page outline of it with a log line on it, so I know what I'm selling to myself in a weird way. And that log line really literally never changed on this movie. Like, do
you remember what the log line was?
A down on his luck stuntman is drawn into, an investigation to find his leading man in order to win back the love of his life, but finds himself at the center of the conspiracy that he's there to solve. Like and it was literally always the first idea I always had was, oh, wouldn't it be fun if we hid in plain sight that he is a Fall Guy? Like that idea is entirely inspired by the name of the movie, Weirdly, it was always there. So, very briefly, it's a 5-pager with a log line. It's then the next thing is like I break it as a scene by scene in this version because I'm very close with David. That scene by scene went back and forth with him like a lot.
Tell us about your scene by scene document. How many pages?
Yeah, right. 2 different methods of working. One is there's a board right over there, like that is cards. That's one way of doing it. And when I'm working with other writers, I use a card system first of all. And then I'm going back and forth between that and a Word document that's literally the header of each scene, a description of what's going to happen, usually bullet pointed. And that document will become more and more important to me as I head towards writing. When I'm working with David, for example, what I tend to do instead is I tend to sling something up on the Apple TV in front of us and talk through each of the sections and then kind of re-note my scene by scene as I'm doing it. Either way, prep is just everything for me because I'm a really fast writer. When I start writing, I need to kind of basically build up and know everything I need and then like fire myself out a cannon. That's how I end up like enjoying how the characters talk to each other, because then I can just be them on the page, right? The thing that starts as a scene by scene document, which is for kind of, consumption of the director and whoever else, that becomes more and more detailed and more just mine as the process goes along. And usually by the time I start writing, it's like 35 pages long. And underneath each of those headings will be all of my notes, will be like pieces of dialogue that I've thought of, will be images. Before I start writing, I'll always do an image pass as well of like, what stuff can I put in here that isn't dialogue, that's definitely not exposition or plot, but like, and sometimes I will find that on a second or a third draft, but every single draft I do now, and this is new, I've only started doing this in the last couple of years, I'll certainly by second or third draft, I will do a pass through which goes, are there any visual motifs that in here? Because I think it's just really additive. You're not taking anything away from the director. The director can chuck them out if he doesn't like them or she doesn't like them. But there's something a bit more filmic about doing a pass through things where you go, what can I take away rather than what can I add? A day comes where I look at that scene by scene and I'm like, and I beat up on it so hard, because I hate rewriting. Like, I hate rewriting scripts. I do it. There are 28 drafts of The Fall Guy, but I annoy myself. Like the worst feeling, we've all done it, is you get to the end of Act 2 and you're like, what am I doing? Like, this doesn't come together.
Right.
I convinced myself that the Act 3 would work, even though I knew in the back of my head that it wasn't gonna. And guess what? I wrote for 3 weeks and I got to the end of Act 2 and Act 3 doesn't work. You know, I feel like one of the things, it can't happen every time, but one of the things about having done this for a few years now is you can be harder and harder. I think it's good to be harder and harder on yourself as you go, because you do know where some of the bodies are buried. And there's no point in pushing forward into a draft. There are some writers who find it, and that is great. And I will find new stuff when I'm writing, but like, I really have to play a game of believe with myself where I'm like, do you think you can stick that landing?
It's funny because like in the movie that made it into the movie in which they're debating their third act in the movie. And, you know, the Emily Blunt character is hung up on how she needs to fix her third act. So clearly you were traumatized, sir.
But honestly, that's also because this is just the process of me writing a draft. When you actually start shooting the movie, all that stuff starts over again. Yeah. You know, and it's obviously different movie to movie, but like this one, because there's like an authenticity to it, because there's this kind of like freewheeling vibe to it, you know, I saw every second of footage shot and I was there and, you know, being part of it. That's the part where you really do have to kind of lose your ego when you're in full screenwriter mode, is you go, there's weirdly a line from Hotel Artemis, I'm going to quote myself, which is really rare because literally I have the worst memory on God's earth, so I don't know my own lines. But there's a line about bank robberies, which is you work with what you got, not what you hoped for. And I do think that's absolutely true of shooting a film as well. But you've got a better chance if what you hoped for was really good and coherent and like both entertaining and thematically, you know, rich or whatever. So that is mostly my on the page process, and it's augmented by a playlist that I do, a musical playlist for every single movie. Partly because I have to like bounce between projects and they work as kind of like triggers for the change.
I've interviewed Christopher Nolan before, and I remember on writing Inception, he said that he would specifically listen to the same music every day he sat down to write Inception. And it psychologically puts you in the zone. Not even a playlist. I'm sure Nolan was using like records, you know, that somebody was.
I'm sure he was. I'm sure he was using his gramophone, but
yes, exactly.
backwards as well.
Exactly.
The only downside is I can't have like a repeated track from one playlist to another because it reminds me too much of the other movie that I was doing.
Yeah.
And then B, sometimes it'll take so long, you know, over the course of 2 years to be writing a film or whatever, that you will burn out a track you previously loved because you've heard it so.
How long was your scene by scene?
It was a 28-page scene by scene. Yeah, so 28 pages.
That seems like a regular length, to be honest, from what I hear often about these.
Yeah, I think so.
Like that's a good length.
Honestly, I've found the more, I don't know if this is true, but like I've found conversationally, the more experienced a screenwriter is, the more they prep and scene by scene. And you might assume it was the other way around. Like you're newer to it, you need more prep, you know, but as you kind of, you know, do it more, maybe you need less. I have a feeling it's because the more you do it, the more you realize that the preparation is kind of everything, honestly. Like that 30 pages is in many ways more valuable than the dialogue-based first draft.
I think that psychologically it allows writers to turn off that logical side of their brain when they're writing because they know exactly where they're going, and it lets them explore consciously.
Yeah, it just lets me be. You know, as I've done this more, I'm more and more attracted to stories that are quite a straight line. So that it allows me to write like in squiggles around the straight line. Like, you know, but I don't want to. I want the audience to understand what an emotion is when I hit it. And so understand why a character feels one way. And so when something happens, they feel like this, you know?
Yeah.
And honestly, it's strange. And this movie's a really good example. It's a super straight line. It is The Long Goodbye. It is, you know, like I keep going back to Point Blank at the moment. I'm like, it's just that is like the straightest arrow of a film you are ever going to get. And it's a really beautiful
Well,
format.
in our spoilers section, we'll get into how you squiggled, because I saw exactly how you do it, and it was highly entertaining. You know, last two questions, and I mean that in a good way. Last two questions of like the non-spoiler stuff. What was the budget and the schedule?
Budget, I think, is like 125, but I think that's before the tax, but after the tax break, before the tax break, I'm not sure. But like it's in the low.
Australia kicked in like 29 million. So.
Oh yeah, huge money. You know, the thing about that, there were various iterations of this script. There's a Berlin one, there's a London one, there's an Australian one. Like
right.
You know,
for the tax breaks.
So that was that. And then what was the other question? Schedule.
Schedule. Yeah. How long did it shoot for?
We shot for, I think, 88 days.
Oh wow.
David's obviously come from second unit, so he trusts his second unit teams, but also quite likes to be there. So like, there's a bit of like back and forth, but you know, it was around it was just over 80, I believe.
Well, let's get into our spoilers. So podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which you could see these Zoomcasts on. If you have not yet seen Fall Guy, press pause, go see it. It's in theaters. Come back.
For God's sake, go see it. What are you doing?
Go see it. Bring your friends, bring your family. It's an all ages movie.
Maybe you know what? Just like rent the whole theater, because no one wants to hear someone eating. So like that they don't know. So just like get a row.
Get a row. Or rent the theater. I agree. And then come back, because we're getting into our spoilers. Look, I got to off the top start with the most important spoiler of the movie. You guys are shooting at El Coyote in Los Angeles, and it's not called El Coyote. What the hell happened? I know that there's no multi-level.
No clearance for El Coyote. Like,
really?
So it's fake El Coyote. And it's interesting you say that, because it is another thing that links up to Iron Man 3, because there's actually a piece of concept art up on that wall. Okay. This one here, you see, that I'm kind of roughly pointing at? That is the Neptune's Net scene from Iron Man 3, which is a real life biker bar on the PCH that when I first moved to LA, I weirdly took my 1-year-old kid to. And, you know, it has in Iron Man 3, like Tony's there with Rhodey. They park their suits outside. I always thought it would look cool to have all the bikes and then the 2 suits there too. That is cool. But on that one, permission was granted for Neptune's Net, even though the interior of the Neptune's Net that we created on the soundstage is like 700 times bigger than the bar itself. This time, I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of the clearance, but yes, fans of El Coyote will understand what we are looking at.
We know what we're looking at, and there is no multi-level parking structure near El Coyote, so maybe that was it. Maybe it was the purity that they
By the way, it could have been that. Also, you know what it will have been? I honestly know what it will have been. It's because it's a real Dave thing that I have as well. You know, what you'll also see up there is the concept art for Hotel Artemis, and the shot where, you know, you've got the big sign on the top of a hotel, which is a very LA thing. There's no world where Dave didn't want to just invent a thing that had a sign on top of it so that we could shoot up there, because that always looks iconic and great, and it's so kind of like taps into kind of the beginning of Lethal Weapon or any of those things, you know.
Absolutely. It's always fun to hear about left turns. Tell us about early versions of the script that you thought were going to stick that were never even shot. I'm not talking about deleted scenes. I'm talking about things that you wrote. Maybe they were storyboarded, and then because of budget, schedule, or just changes in your script, they never happened, but fans of the film would still think it's cool to hear about.
The story stayed relatively the same. The bad guy changed quite a few times. And it was really just about scope and scale, which is, you know, there were versions of the movie, and I think we will explore some of these ideas if we get the chance to do more movies. So I'm going to be somewhat cagey about them. But there were definitely versions where the movie's relationship to real life danger was more pronounced and more, you know, like more of a kind of straighter action movie. And actually, as we were kind of finding the tone and the love story was becoming more important, you know, for this film, I think it became more and more about, you know, trying to keep it kind of within the film world a little bit more. That was a significant change. There were some things that probably don't sound significant, but like were major for me, which is like first 2 drafts, Jodie was hair and makeup, and then she became the director, and then that led to Emily, and then Emily gives you even more to play with. So Jodie's character, you know, the movie plays pretty close to a two-hander, I would say. And that is a thing that definitely happened through evolution. I tell you a really obvious thing. Like one of those things that's like, I'm a moron. I should have seen it, for 3 drafts. The movie's called The Fall Guy. Always knew there had to be at least one big fall in it. Always had him hurting himself at the beginning, though that came in and out. But yeah, hurting himself from a big fall. But for many drafts, that had led to him being like petrified of heights. He's the stuntman that is scared of heights. That was the kind of gag of it, but also the danger of it. So there's now, in this spoilerific version, there is a big drop at the end of the movie that Ryan's character does. And of course, he's the fall guy. That's the thing. That used to be at the end of Act 2. It was a different version of it. It was off a crane. Like it was a different setup. Yeah. He still was faking his own death. But the trouble was, and it took us a lot of drafts to work this out, you want to end on the fall because the movie's called The Fall Guy.
Right.
If you do the big fall at the end of Act 2, you're not really giving yourself that many iconic places to go in the third act.
Sure.
That one took me so long to spot, like an idiot. But those are the kind of changes in this one. They're like, characters went in and out, but there were different versions of, Winston's character. One was an older, more kind of Burgess Meredith, Rocky kind of vibe of a kind of elder stuntsman. Dresler, who's kind of a henchman in it now, had like a much more major role at one point. But that's the strange thing. This one has always been about like blowing things out and bringing things in for tone more than for plot, honestly. You know,
it's interesting because also you have, thematically, your noir that you inserted into this as part of the conspiracy, as you called it. And he is the fall guy. He's going to be the fall guy for the accidental death. The play on words, the fall guy, not just like a stunt guy, but literally the patsy. I thought that was really smart as well.
And like, I knew the show when I was really, really little, and I loved the show. So it was really interesting for me to go like, oh, we could make that a play on words. And like, I was really pleased with myself about that idea, and I'm really glad that it stuck,
Yeah. Tell me this about the show. Like it's interesting because in the show, he is still doing stunts, but he's also a bounty hunter.
Well, this is the thing, right? This is
right. So like, did you ever keep any of that, or did you really just decide? And I like what you did, but I'm just curious if any of that show stuff was in your early drafts.
That's what's really interesting. So I've spoken about this a couple of times now, but like it's true. When I was really little, I lived in England. For some random reason, The Fall Guy was on a Saturday night on like one of the 3 TV channels. We didn't have cable in the UK. There were 3 TV channels. And for some reason, like The Fall Guy was in there on a Saturday night, like jammed between like British wrestling and some British game show, right? I loved it. I used to watch it with my dad every week. I was obsessed with stunt guys. I used to play stunt guys. That was the games I played. I literally built a stunt course in my garden. In fact, my dad found this up the loft. This is my old Matchbox, which is awesome. A version of Hot Wheels. This is the one I had when I was 5, right? So, but that's what's really weird because so when they came to me about The Fall Guy, I was like, oh, I was the biggest fan. And then I literally chuck out pretty much everything to do with the TV show instantly. I'm like, sure, we can have a truck and a stuntman and maybe some sunglasses at some point. But it's because I really do believe that a bunch of those kind of like bounty hunters, private detectives, all of those things, they don't really exist. They don't exist now in any of the recognizable forms that they were in, 60s, 70s, even 80s cinema.
Right.
Plus, by the way, cops, also very different to do nowadays compared with 80s and 90s cinema, right? So, which is actually what kind of led me to the more, Long Goodbye-ish hero. When you combine the idea of making it about a fall guy with the fact that he's not going to be a bounty hunter, it actually just very organically led in my head to, oh, this patsy is the guy that kind of gets forced into doing a thing that's not his job. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was strangely organic. And it's one of those things where now when I look back at it, I'm like, God, I got there so quick.
Yeah, you dodged a bullet because if you were too like the show, I think it could have had some failure points. Whereas the movie, by leaning more into the stunts and movie making, makes it just more entertaining. to be honest,
But
for modern
it is
audiences.
interesting because, and listen, I honestly, for me personally, I could do with a little more jeopardy in the third act, but I think what we did, we gave some of that up in order to lean into tone and comedy. And I think it's just important to understand sometimes that you have to give something away to gain something, and that's okay. But the interesting thing is, if you really look at noir, it is usually a bumbling male lead doing something because of like it doesn't have to be a femme fatale, but like, you know, I am the biggest. Again, you're in my office, so you can see literally like every Elmore Leonard book he ever wrote is there, right next to every Raymond Chandler book, right?
Well, and we were talking about Long Goodbye. I mean, like it's again like The Big Lebowski, you know, which also is seated in noir, and he just falls into it, and that's the fun of it.
And it's funny because I've not really talked about this being a noir because I don't want to scare people, you know? Right. But like, because instantly people are like, oh, it's like slatted windows with the light coming through.
Yeah.
You know, someone's smoking a cig.
No,
and it's I think
the trailer is. I get it. People get scared and they get confused.
Look at Marlowe. Look at noir heroes. They are usually a man who is a like somewhat tainted knight figure, knight with a K, right? Yeah. Like, you know, whose flaws are in his like kind of masculine thinking that he needs to save people. And actually, that's usually the way that he is tricked. And that is exactly what Colt's character is in this movie, you know? And they're also usually, by the way, someone who has come back from war. Like if you look at anything in Elmore Leonard, it's all like post-Vietnam characters. You know, Marlowe, post-World War character. And I do think like the Colt Seaver's character's injury in the first 3 minutes of this film is that kind of coming back from war thing. So again, it's great to be able to talk about it here because I'm not going to be talking about it in other forums because I don't want people going like, they made sugar, you know?
Right.
I have not seen maybe an immaculate noir, but it, you know, it's a guy driving around in an open top car, you know, and it looks like there'll be some jazz.
You essentially converted Howie, which was, you know, a mentor-mentee relationship from Fall Guy into his boss of the stunt coordinator, which I thought was another smart idea. Did you ever play with the mentor-mentee idea? Because I could easily see it working as well here, but I thought it was, again, a smart change from the show to this
honestly,
movie.
That was one of those things that's somewhat more casting led as well. Like there were lots of different ages of people that we thought of for Winston's character.
Winston plays Dan, just for our audience.
Dan, who is the
stunt coordinator,
the stunt designer on the movie. It was just one of those things where that felt like a better look. We're smuggling another little Shane Black movie in there, right? Because we're smuggling in two guys who used to know each other on the run, and we get like 3 good Lethal Weapon-y scenes out of them, you know, and that's just like great value and very charming. I think it was also that thing that when we knew we wanted the love affair to feel as authentic and as real as possible, then we realized that we did have to somewhat present the movie set and the world and the crime as realistically as possible as well, so that we didn't undercut the authenticity we were going for in the romance.
Right.
And there are some characters which are more caricature and kind of play bigger, but weirdly, Dan's character then really felt like he needed to be as grounded a friend as possible, honestly.
So for Jodie, as you said, her evolution was hair and makeup to director. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, just because knowing the film industry as well as I do, and even you do as well, it is interesting that they've only been apart for 1 year. And I was curious.
Year and a half. It's been a year and a half.
But even in Hollywood time, going from camera to directing a mega budget movie, I was curious if it was ever like 5 years or longer, and you just didn't want to play with like what you would have to do with makeup.
In my head, it's still 3 years, which is how it was written. And also, honestly, the other thing is, and maybe the movie doesn't make this clear, but like by a certain point, she's been a DOP for like 5 years. So she actually makes the move from cinematographer to director. And so in my head, the entirety of her career is probably 12 years from focus pull to director.
Sure.
which I feel like if someone's really talented, it could happen.
Yeah.
But obviously, there's a certain aspect of this which is Field of Dreams, right? There should be more brilliant, like, female action directors given, opportunities. So if we build it, they will come,
100%. I was just curious, like, it's good to hear that it was maybe 3 years that they were apart.
I agree.
Like in an earlier draft, because that made sense. But I know that there's also makeup considerations that, if you have to make them look younger than they are.
I don't know what the contraction is, because also if you think about the scene where she is telling him what she's been doing since they split up.
Right.
It sounds like she's had more relationships than you just jam into 1 year. Do you know what I mean? Like, yes. I would say that, like...
But she might have been making that up, too, to hurt him. Like,
I don't think she was. Honestly, I think she threw herself into her life post-cult. But it is interesting because I think it presents like there's a little bit more time has passed, maybe. He broke his back and it's healed. And I'm no expert on that, but I did a little bit of research and it is, still a bit ropey after a year.
I was going to ask about that next, but
by the way, again, like, here's the thing that was discussed a lot is, in reference to Hooper. Like, I find the stuff with Hooper's back and like his injury and the final stunt to be really emotionally affecting in that film. Like, it's not a gag, even though the movie ends with a fucking like wink to camera. And the moment where, we replicate it after the cannon roll a little bit, but like that moment where you're running towards Burt Reynolds and he's like literally hunched in the car and he's not moving. I remember feeling genuinely very worried the first time I watched it, So there was also like, as well as the conversation about fear of heights that was in a lot of the drafts, there was also a thing of like, should we be trying to make the injury a part of it? But honestly, I think one of the things is because this is such a kind of stunts forward kind of a film.
Right.
The idea, it's a bit like doing a movie that wants to celebrate, football players, but then like their awful head injury is part of the plot. And it's like, no, probably shouldn't do that. For example, one late in the day edition that we talked about back and forwards is, because this is a spoiler version, is the fact that Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, that he was responsible for the stunt going wrong at the beginning of the movie. That wasn't always the case. But I think what that also allowed us to do is kind of go like, this isn't just something that happens by mistake on stunt-based sets.
It was good because it shows our hero, the perfectionist that he is, didn't make a mistake. And it also makes, the character of Tom, more nefarious because he's just like, egomaniac.
It was part of a discussion about how nefarious do we want Tom to be? It's like, it's that classic kind of push me, pull you conversation.
You were talking about the squiggles earlier, and you were talking about all the Elmore Leonard books behind you. I saw what you did, and I love it, in which you were talking about they're apart, but you want to get them together, and you were thinking of every possible way. The split screen scene that you do was just fantastic. And it harkens back to kind of that scene in Out of Sight, Elmore Leonard, with Clooney and her, and they're together, they're apart, they're talking, they're not. Like, it was great. And like, I thought it was a really good way to do character that was highly entertaining because they were mirroring their actions through the split screen. There were funny moments, but it was good revelatory for character.
That's like oldest cinema, right? It's kind of Douglas Sirk. It's that thing of create a physical barrier between your characters on screen as you look at the image in order to, metaphorically show the distance between the two of them. Split screen hasn't really been used that much for that. It's usually, again, to trick you into feeling like your two stars are together, even though in the movie you need them to be apart, right? So that's one of the things we're doing for sure. And we call attention to the fact that literally the device is keeping them apart too, because that's the kind of movie this is. But it's interesting you mention Out of Sight, because what Soderbergh is the master of, and that era of Soderbergh, his run of that era is probably one of my favorite runs of any director ever. My feeling is he was taking like 60s and 70s filmmaking formal theory and applying them to like 90s ideas in a way that was actually like, that was the most progressive that a lot of formal ideas had been in the mainstream at that point, And obviously the intercuts in the lovemaking scene in Out of Sight are the most beautiful version of that. David Leitch and I are massive fans of that and of intercutting in general. And it's an interesting thing because often you will be told as a screenwriter, don't intercut on the page because that's for editorial. And I understand that. And I also understand how fucking annoying it sometimes is to try and read intercuts on a page. But my personal preference, and I will find tricks in Final Draft to work out how to do it every different way. Those cutting rhythms were all in the script. That's one of the advantages of me and the director knowing each other so well, having worked together before, because I know if he's finding something boring on the page, if I do it as an intercut, Dave's going to be like, oh, I like the juxtaposition. I'm like, yeah, we got it.
I was going to ask you how you did that on the page. Like for the split screen, did you just say that it's a split screen and then you wrote it as normal dialogue so you didn't have to talk about the back and forth?
Yeah, this is real Final Draft shit we're talking here. And you are talking to a man who has a tattoo on his right hand written in Final Draft Courier size 12. It says the end, which are the two best words you ever type.
Yes, that's amazing.
So my Final Draft tricks for intercuts are do a line from each of them with their scene headings, then do a slug that says intercut, and then just do the smallest amounts of action writing in between, but that has both of them in it. So it's like Colt goes into the bathroom, Jody walks into the props cupboard.
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
And I think I forget this every script I write, which is the more you can be in the flow of dialogue or simplicity, the better the read is, the more you stay in the scene yourself as a writer. And so for a scene like that, it really was write the conversation and then describe how the split screen is working as minimally as and invasively as impossible.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm one that says it is okay to intercut because you're doing the first iteration of the story. Editing is the last stage of storytelling, as we all know, and editors are fantastic at storytelling. But if you as an artist have a specific scene in mind and the way that it should go, it is fine to do what you did in intercut. And I was going to actually comment again, the other trick that you found as you were talking about going sideways on that line, it was wild how much intercutting you did between the garbage truck chase and the karaoke scene for Against All Odds. That was something that I could tell as I was watching it did not seem to be discovered in the editing room. No. I would think that you wrote it that way because
I did. Now that one I didn't write with all the specific cuts in it.
Well, of course.
But I was like, this intercuts with this. The song talks to the action. Yeah, that whole sequence is, only really works dynamically because he is trying to get back to her, And so if you're reading it on the page as consecutive scenes, you're never going to understand that in the read even,
right.
And that's really all. Listen, I think this is the other thing. And I hate when non-writers are like, oh, the script is just a blueprint anyway. It is, I get it, but that's wildly reductive. What I do think that it's easy to forget is that reading a script is fucking boring. And you should do everything you can. I find it boring. I find my own scripts even more boring than everyone else's scripts. So the more you can do to help a reader, that is not cheating your craft. That is your craft. Think about the first line that each character says or how you introduce them in the script, because the actor you want to play that character is sure as shit going to look at what their first line is and how they're introduced in the script. And that's how you get a movie made. It's also, happily and coincidentally, how you do great character introductions. So it's not one thing is a duplicitous version. It's just the practicalities of reading a script aren't always that different to the practicalities of how you want an audience to take in your story and your characters.
Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine and, of course, our sponsors, screencraft.org and finaldraft.com. Over at Backstory Magazine, our Oscar issue is still our main issue, but hey, we're an electronic magazine, so we keep updating it again and again and again. For instance, we have a great article hitting the magazine soon for this season of Star Wars The Bad Batch, and we take you behind the scenes, get into the spoilers and everything. We even have an article coming out after that for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. So we are always updating the magazine because we're an electronic magazine, and that's what we do. If you've never read us before, you could check out our free issue, and if you like what you see, and I hope you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription or a gift subscription, whichever you want. And look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners listeners in iTunes and Spotify, and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page support my passion project, so thanks for considering becoming subscribers. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you'll check out our sponsor, Screencraft, over at screencraft.org, and over there you'll find video lectures, career coaching opportunities, and plenty of genre-specific contests to enter. Screencraft winners and finalists have gone on to have their scripts produced into movies and TV shows, and their next contest is active right now. It's the Action Adventure Screenplay Competition, and it's open until June 30th, 2024. And if you'd like to save money, you could use discount coupon code QAPodcast, all one word, and that will save you 10% off a standard entry into the Action Adventure Screenplay Competition. So look, there's plenty to do over at Screencraft, and I hope you'll explore it all by visiting screencraft.org today. Of course, before you enter a contest, you gotta write your script, and Final Draft 13 was recently released, and it's the newest version of the industry standard screenwriting software. In fact, Final Draft is used by over 95% of the film and television community, along with screenwriting pros like Aaron Sorkin, Guillermo del Toro, James Cameron, and Sofia Coppola, just to name a few. There's new and improved features in Final Draft 13 that include character development tools, more ways to customize your writing environment, set character goals, track your progress, and more. And now you could save 25% off an upgrade or new purchase to Final Draft 13, and it's part of a special sale that goes on until May 6th, 2024. You don't need a code or anything like that. Just visit finaldraft.com and either purchase or upgrade to Final Draft 13, and the 25% discount will be applied in your online shopping cart. But don't forget, you only have until May 6th, 2024. So remember, folks, Final Draft makes formatting a screenplay easy, so you could focus on what you do best, the writing. Visit finaldraft.com today to learn more. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our interview with screenwriter Drew Pearce about his latest film, The Fall Guy, which is in theaters right now and is a hilarious roller coaster ride of a film that I hope you go see in theaters. I would be remiss if I didn't mention David Leitch. You know, cool. He has a SAG award for stunts on Bourne Ultimatum along with his team, and he was a stunt person. Yeah. And he's done it for Brad Pitt. Like, you know, he's kind of the man, and he's a perfect choice to make this movie. And I'm curious, just briefly, because I know that you could do a long list, what are some of the things that he influenced with you about the stunt community that were important to him to make sure were a part of the script? Because, you know, look, I love the way that Colt's wearing a Union shirt, you know.
Yeah, very important. That was big. That was big,
and that was fantastic. And, you know, just all these elements like really cooked nicely together. So I'm curious, what were some of the things that David kind of influenced on the stunt side?
I'm very lucky in that sometimes I write, sometimes I direct, sometimes I produce, sometimes it's all of them, whatever. I think it's really helpful for kind of learning where to park your ego on each project, right? And so when I came into this, I said to Dave, okay, my project here is like real like 70s screenwriter thing, right? Is I want to make the very best David Leitch movie that can exist. I was like, and I'm not going to apologize for the fact that I want this to be the film at your in memoriam that people are like, this is his, right? Yeah. This is the defining one, which is kind of weird for any human to hear, but I went with it. Yeah. And so all the way along, it was always about like, what can I steal from my friend David's life? You know, like, what can I throw in there? Dogs are a very big part of his life. That's why there's a lot of dogs in the film.
For our podcast listeners, the dog Jean-Claude, who receives his commands in French, David also was a stunt performer for Jean-Claude Van Damme.
And also that dog went through different actors' names.
Okay.
But so, you know, and so it was just very, and also David and I met on films in, you know, like where he was running stunts or like directing action movies. So the language and being around the stunt guys was just like a part of how we knew each other. Also, by the way, I then, like, even once I kind of locked it in, I set up like 12, 13 different like 4-hour interviews with all my, with a really wide range of stunt performers, just so that I wasn't like basing the idea of a stunt performer on Hooper. You know, it's like modern stunt performers, there's still a kind of piratical element to some of them, but often what they are mostly is like gymnasts or ex-sports people or ex-military, which is how, the Chad, Stilecki, and Leach, John Wick, tactical firearms, vibe came in. Or, by the way, they studied in Korea and brought some of that back. So really, like, it needed, again, so that the love story felt real, I wanted the stunt department in particular to feel as real as possible.
That was awesome as well. And again, the garbage truck sequence going back and forth was amazing. One of the things that's been reported that you've talked about is that you did something that doesn't always happen as extensively as it seems to have happened, if I'm understanding it right on this film, in which you were doing a lot of rewrites during production. Obviously, the set heads need to know, okay, we need a beach. We're doing these scenes.
Yeah.
They know that we need a garbage truck. We're doing that sequence. There's certain things that they have to do because there's sets that have to be built. There's locations that have to be cleared. But dialogue and character could change a lot. And I'm curious if you could talk us through some of your on-set rewrites that you said that you did throughout production, because it's just fascinating to hear how things evolve for you in that final rewrite that you're doing once you're seeing it in actors' hands.
I mean, I'm going to be honest. Certainly in a movie, every movie's different, right? Every process of a movie, writing to shooting to editing to releasing, is different, with casting a big part in that.
Yeah.
This one, I never really felt like there was a pause, to be honest. Like, I would do a new draft, a new actor would come on board, I would do a new draft, I would be feeding in locations, I would be feeding in Chris Ware, the stunt designer's new stuff. Honestly, there wasn't like a kind of break where it's like, now we're shooting. It honestly just felt like that flow of information, new information, be it in personnel or in, geographical or just in new ideas. Tons of stuff coming in from Ryan the whole time, like, lines, pages, everything. He's a fucking brilliant writer. There's just so much stuff coming in that it becomes workflow at a certain point. And actually, my job on some levels is to make sure I'm delivering the micro day to day, whilst also, because on this one I'm not directing it, trying to help people stay macro enough to go, we can do that, but if we do that, this is the repercussion down the road.
Is there a rewrite that you're proud of? Is there like a moment where kind of you knew that you were under the clock, you got to get something new in there?
Honestly, official draft 3, which was probably a draft 9, is the draft I'm most proud of, because it's the one that got the movie greenlit.
Got it.
From then on, you're off to the races and you're in process. But like, that was the draft where Donna Langley and Peter Kramer said, we will do a pay or play deal with Ryan now, which means that this movie is getting made.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's a really good day.
That is a fantastic day.
And they are very rare. They are very, very rare.
Doing a rewrite on set is different. Do you remember like feeling like in that kind of potboiler moment where like the heat is on, like the clock is ticking, you got to get this new page done, and in the 11th hour you came up with something fascinating that you could tell us about? I
know it sounds like weird when you say it, but you talking about that didn't make me feel anxious, because I was just like, that's where I live. In some of my other jobs I'm still lucky enough to do very occasional, but like at work, script doctoring. And sometimes on those jobs, I am literally delivering entirely new scenes and pages that, at 9 at night that need to be shot at 7 a.m. the next day.
Right.
So that's in my skill set anyway, which is probably, by the way, why David likes working with me, because, having the directorial part as well in what I do means that, there are some people who will deliver a scene late to a production and they've invented a bunch of practical details that they are literally not going to be able to put together. So the scene is absolutely, essentially pointless.
Right.
And so you really have to be thinking practically. And that, again, there's no dishonor in that. That's how we make films. Like, that's not how we write novels, but that is how we make films.
And I like in the moment writing. Great things could come from it. And
me too.
It allows screenplays to evolve and feel organic. So, I mean, it's great. It's great that way as well.
100%.
So, in your movie, they talk a lot about the studio giving notes. I'm curious if there were any crazy notes that you got on this, or if there weren't any crazy studio notes that you want to kind of give us insight into from your past. If you're talking studio notes, it's totally fine to not mention names. Like, I'm not going from names, more just the absurdity and irony of it all.
I would actually say the studio notes we got on the Fall Guy were pretty great, and right the way through to the edit. I often just simply agreed with them. Frankly, obviously, there have been other instances in other projects in the past. I think probably the most infamous that's actually relatively well known as a studio note is when the higher ups at Marvel, before Kevin had taken over, like kind of full control of, but Ike Perlmutter, I think his name is, the guy who kind of ran the board at Marvel before the Disney takeover. He famously, mid-production, basically told us that, Rebecca Hall's character in Iron Man 3 had to be less villainous. We weren't in full production, actually. That's not true. It was like 2 drafts before then, because female villains didn't sell toys, was what we were told. So fairly major studio notes that that had to be complied with as well.
I want to get to the antagonists here, and because we're in the spoiler section still, of course. And, it's a good pairing in which you have Tom and you have Gale. Yeah. Tom is just like, an egocentric actor. Gale obviously is trying to hold on to her power. And, since you've put it in Hollywood terms, she's falling into that classic power fixer, the Hollywood fixer, in which she's just going to fix everything. And in this case, she decides somebody needs to die for the fix. I'm just curious what other permutations you played with when it came to antagonists and, ways for the conspiracy to enter this plot.
Well, in some of the earlier drafts, there was a figure one removed from that. Gale was part of the machinations, but there was a kind of like underworld figure that was part of a kind of bigger real world conspiracy that this had been kind of pulled into. Ryan's instinct was to have a movie that was more based in and around the movie itself, which I don't think is necessarily wrong. That part got kind of paired off, basically. And so hence, Gale as the antagonist kind of rises into that place.
Well, I mean, it's a really funny scene when, they have him and they're talking through the plot and they're dousing him in gasoline and all that, and he's tied up. It's fascinating because, suddenly Ryan, his character of Colt starts giving a note to Tom about, this is kind of heavy exposition. I'm not sure it's believable. Talk about that because you're spilling a lot on the audience, but as you were influenced by something like The Long Goodbye, making fun of the plot, which is inherent in these movies, and calling it into question is something that even those movies kind of do, of how far out they get.
Listen, there's always this nexus in a movie like this. It happens in so many movies like that have some kind of like adventure shape or thriller shape, which is the expo dump that has to come at the end of Act 2, beginning of Act 3. And honestly, like, you try and make the scene do double or triple duty rather than just be exposition. That will often be, let's make it funny. In our version, we intercut it as well so that we are at least refreshing. Because in the edit, you will find what you can lose, but you kind of have to shoot all of it because you don't know until an audience sees it which questions they want the answers to and which they'll blow through. And you kind of always have to know you obviously have to know what the answers are yourself. Truthfully, those expo dumps are longer than the one you see in the movie. And then you just start paring it back and going like, oh, they didn't need to know this. Maybe we can show, not tell that. Maybe that one isn't even relevant, So and that's absolutely what that scene is.
Because you guarded yourself with putting humor into it by them making fun of it to the audience and questioning, would there be script notes to it? But then you had that line, and you're going to have to remind me what it was. But like out of nowhere, Colt starts yelling, carbs. You can't only do carbs.
It's basically because Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, Ryder, he has basically concocted this plan, or at least this kind of explanation, and he delivers it and says that it's simple. Right. And Cole's like, it's absolutely not simple. It's incredibly complicated. You need to eat carbs. Your brain functions on sugar. And listen, it's a total cheat on my part as well, because it's basically like, oh, if you think this plot's too complicated, then that's fine because it's from the mind of this lunatic.
Well, I mean, it works perfectly. Like the audience that I saw it with, because it's so out of nowhere, that line. It's so funny. I mean, they went crazy for it. I want to return to the page for a second.
Yeah.
There's a lot of action here. What does your action look like on the page? What are important things? Obviously, everybody knows, just as a basis, try and include as much white space as you can. But how much description do you get into versus things might later come from working with the team and storyboarding?
Well, I mean, listen, everybody does it different. Every project's different. But what tends to happen is I tend to write action out. Sometimes it might be a little more bullet pointed, but an action sequence is kind of like a song in a musical. There's this rule about putting songs in musicals, which is if the story hasn't been moved forward between the beginning of a song and the end of a song, then the song shouldn't be in the musical. It shouldn't just be there to spin its wheels.
Right.
And an action sequence is the same. Like if the characters' relationships or the story itself haven't changed from the beginning to the end of the action sequence, then it shouldn't exist. However, like exciting it sounds, because it's not actually doing anything narrative. It's not telling any story, is the honest truth. One of the reasons I think it's really important to write action into a script, even if every single word of it is, chewed up and spat out like in a different shape and all of that, you need to know where you want the characters to be at the beginning and where they'll be at the end of that action sequence. And ideally, in writing out your version of it, you will find a couple of moments that will then survive, be they a line or a bit, like the idea of doing a jump onto and then off of, a camera arm was in my very first list of like ideas that I gave Dave, because I liked the idea of using backstage equipment front of house for our movie,
Right.
And that bit like bounced around sections in the movie and ended up actually being like kind of the keynote part of the ending and on the posters. And if I hadn't written that out from the beginning, even though it, as I say, it moved in, it moved out, it moved around, the image, the idea, that stuck.
It was really strong. I mean, it was no surprise that something like that ended up on the poster. Well, so, for that great scene when he escapes from being tied up, that's when you have one of your strongest monologues come. It's just a great monologue. And he has another vulnerable moment, but he goes deeper, in which he essentially says it all hurts, and we're just kind of trying to give a thumbs up to pretend that we're okay. But he says, the thing that hurt the most was not being around you. It's happening in the middle of an action sequence.
Which is the tough bit,
Yeah, no,
it got
works.
longer, it got shorter, like how long can you suspend disbelief,
Well, tell us
how
about
long
that.
can you suspend disbelief about Jodie not interrupting him or wondering what's going on? There's a lot of, that's a real like game of believe sequence,
I mean, was it always hitting there? Was it always during action?
Yeah. And in fact, like that used to be, because that was originally the big fall at the end of Act 2. And so he was like climbing a crane while he did that cool.
Oh, okay.
And then when we made the boat stunt, the end of Act 2 idea, that's when I realized that like halfway through the action sequence, essentially, he had to like stop and go into a kind of like hiding place, basically. And what Dave and the stunt team did was they kept that on the move. I think I kind of backed him into, I basically did a drive, but with a boat. Like I had him kind of like back into a dock and switch the lights off. And it's actually, I really love that it's kind of patrolling. And again, that's that kind of really great directorial touch, because that, we're still moving. We've not like stopped entirely. And a lot of that came from Ryan. Like the punchline at the end, I think was Ryan's. I was very keen on this idea that like his flaw comes from being a stuntman, because it's basically the moment where you join up for once and for all the idea that this is a romance and the idea that this is a movie about stunt people. And getting that all in one piece was very satisfying.
Look, I love the Miami Vice theme of, him at the different Universal Studios. Of course, LA, we love our water world. So, I mean,
you can now enjoy 5 minutes of the Fall Guy at the beginning of Waterworld for the whole of the summer.
I might have to go.
I was at the opening of the Fall Guy Stunt-tacular just this Saturday.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, so, let's talk about editing for a second, because it's the last stage of storytelling. Are there any major scenes that were a good lesson for you? Because editing removes things that are, later considered to be redundancies in scripts, scenes you don't need, but scenes you've shot. Because at one point, as you said, you wanted to shoot it and figure it all out. Is there any scene that comes to mind?
The biggest version of that is there was a much, much longer chase during Colt's drug fight, basically.
Okay.
Where Colt chases the drug dealer through a warehouse and over the streets and onto a train. Some of the footage is actually what you see in the second trailer, which doesn't appear in the movie. And all the time he's tripping and it kind of turns into a video game and stuff. I think the consensus was that it was so unreal for so long that it then undercut the reality of the rest of the movie. And it was entertaining, of course. You know, it was really slowing us down to get to the next thing you really want, which is get to the hotel, find the body, but more importantly, get to the hotel and put Colt and Jodie back in the same space again. We were always up against, like, how long is it till we get them together again? You know, it's the core of the thing you want.
And you have them come together again when he's in the alien outfit in her trailer. So you get like a nice, good scene there where they.
Oh, yeah. Like, I'm pulling out all the stops. It's like she's there and the logic of some of them is a tad fuzzy, but like she's there in the reception of the hotel. We do the split screen, which is a way of having them together, but not be together. Once every like 15 minutes, we're trying to at least, or for example, the karaoke sequence where they're not together, but they are intercut. So it feels like it's about them. And then it's the phone call.
And you kept that together as like a very cohesive glue. So, I mean, your finale gets really complicated. You have everything going on. You have all of your characters in the same location at the same time. You have a bajillion stunts going on. And then because the phone has been damaged, they need to get that confession out of Tom, out of Ryder. And so basically you have that happening, that huge stunt. Was there anything that was like a big lesson for you in writing a finale like that? Because it turned out great, and even the helicopter scene worked great, even though, you know, we as an audience have been there before for those kind of helicopter scenes. This one was a bit more whimsical and silly. Again,
that worried me at first, but actually I think it really works for the tone of this film. First of all, it's 15 pages where you're writing the words angle on a lot. Lots of scene headings that sound kind of like the same place, but like different. You know, it's like the pit of the space crash, you know, the space crash itself. So the great thing is, as we were rewriting the third act, we had like the maps of the actual geography of the place. It was all kind of coming in together. That really was like what Jodie's doing in her trailer at the start of Act 3, planning the stunt and planning the set piece. That is literally how we wrote it as well.
I mean, it's funny that you just mentioned angle on, because I'm not trying to endorse this, but so many people get in these childish arguments on Twitter and other places about about what words you should use in a screenplay. And today I saw people arguing about the words "we see." And then somebody was saying that you should never use that. And I'm like, come on, you guys, there's no rules. You just said you use angle on. That's fine. Like, you have to tell the audience. And the funniest was somebody just put pictures of the script of Citizen Kane up and it actually had said "we see" somewhere. Now, I did not verify those pages. Maybe it doesn't, but I was dying. So angle on, it's fine, right? Like, just use.
I mean, honestly, it's whatever lands.
Yeah.
I also, you know, you always hear stuff about like, oh, don't put that in because it'll put off directors. If you writing angle on is the thing that stops a director engaging with your script, then that I would say is unlikely. Because you know what's really easy to do? Take the words angle on out of the script. What's not really easy to do is build a whole script that you want to spend 2 years of your life making.
That's right. I mean, and so people say that's right. Like, oh, if writers try and do too much direction on the page, it turns directors off. And it's like, I don't think the directors take that seriously as direction. They know they could change anything they want, but
I mean, that's the joy of being a director, is you can literally torch what's in your hands and keep one line if you really want to. It's not like directors get intimidated by action. They might get annoyed by badly written direction or baffled by a decision. But I don't think, you know, I go back to this idea with scripts, which is so easy to forget, but like the script is there to be read by humans, right? And so the more entertaining, the easier to read it is, the more chance you have of that person just engaging with what is there. And of course, that doesn't mean the least amount of words every time, because it might be about the simple but most engaging way of conjuring the image that you want them to have in their head. And maybe that does take a little bit of description. So I don't think it's always about brevity, but I do think it's about readability.
And readability is what you need for a draft that's going out for development, for sale. There's a difference between that draft and a production draft. And
I mean,
so,
honestly, like production drafts maybe get sparser when it comes to action. If you're rewriting it for a location you already know you have, then you're probably not going to need to throw in, the fact that it's a sun-dappled grove. We can just be in the grove. But when it's going out to sales, when it's going out to actors, when it's going out to directors, when it's going out to studios, all of those scripts need to be as readable as possible. And it's such a boring thing to say. Every time you send a script, particularly if you're doing casting, think about that specific person that's going to read it. And like, is this the most dynamic way that they get to that character? And you know what? If you've got a scene at the beginning that's really long, that doesn't have them in it, that slows down getting there, for now, chop 2 pages out of that scene. As long as it makes sense and it's there. But because it's about your target audience, there's no world where you don't get those 2 pages back if they are good pages. But just think about the emotional intelligence of a read, basically, and like who is receiving it.
What was your toughest scene? What was the scene on the page you kept coming back to again and again?
I mean, those Nexus scenes at the start of Act 3, they just change forever and ever and ever, and you're always rewriting them. So so the exposition dump between Colt and Tom, I mean, I would have rewritten that 100 times easily.
Okay. Was that your toughest?
But it's not tough, it's just boring because you keep just trying to find new ways of doing it. The thing is that the tough ones are the ones that tend to just be drudgery, I would say. The tough ones that you solve the problem to feel like the best ones. So it was like, how do we end the car chase? Colt has a really stupid idea, but it's going to work. He steps out and just stands in front of the car because it's the one thing he can do that no one else would do to be able to stop the chase. How do we stop it becoming a chase? Like, how do we shut that down? I really like that solution because that's like an Indiana Jones with the pistol to the scimitar wielder kind of thing. Yeah. That was my stuntman equivalent of that.
What was the rules there for writing the movie with the movie? It's hilarious the way Jason Momoa takes over. Was there more to it, less to it?
No, the movie is a tough trick because you need it to be contrasty to the movie that is our film, but you also can't have it be shit because that's like saying Jodie's a bad director.
Right.
So you really have to dance this dance of it's visionary, but it's also a little ludicrous, but ludicrous things can be visionary, and so that was the thing. But one thing that nobody's picked up on is that Metal Storm itself is an old Universal IP, which is nothing like Jodie's movie. We really like the idea of, in the same way that The Fall Guy is an old IP that we're using to tell our story, Jodie is using an old uni IP to tell hers.
I mean, you have it set up really well for a sequel. On the show, Jodie was a stunt woman, but here they've started their own company. They could make other movies. There could be other Hollywood-esque noir adventures masked as a nice summer tentpole type of film. Do you have any ideas for a possible sequel if there could be one? And I hope there will be.
Again, never goading the movie gods with sequel talk before a first movie comes out. Obviously, I would be excited to get this gang back together again, get Ryan and Emily back on screen. I won't say let's do the Jewel on the Nile to our Romancing the Stone, because I know it's not beloved compared with the Romancing the Stone. But let's maybe do our Romancing the Stone to our Fall Guy one.
That could be a blast. Maybe even stuntman actor Jackie Chan's in it somewhere. There's
that is the great thing about this, though, is a new film would mean a new movie in the movie, and that would mean a new vibe, a new theme, new actors to play with. And that is, I think, what could be, that is one of the things that could be really fun about it.
Is there anything you want to tell us about that you're working on next?
I've got this Philip K. Dick adaptation that was just announced last week, which is with Michael B. Jordan at Amazon. And I'm co-writing it with Nick Cuse, who did Watchmen and the Leftovers and stuff.
Which story is it?
The movie will not be called this in the grand tradition of Philip K. Dick adaptation. Because the story is called A Little Something for Us Tempunauts, which is, let's face it, not a blockbuster title. So it's called T- for now as the movie. I love the idea of trying to smuggle, always with the Trojan horse, trying to smuggle some of those big Philip K. Dick ideas into a blockbuster-sized movie. the back of a cigarette packet pitch is Top Gun meets Back to the Future with a Philip K. Dick twist. The great thing about the short story is ours is a different version of this, but it's about a guy who is picked to be sent into the future to save the world, bring back information and save the world. And instead, he lands 10 years in the future where he discovers that in 3 days' time, he'll return and die. So he has essentially been dead for 10 years.
Right.
And these are the last 3 days of his life where he's kind of got everything he wanted. He's treated as the world's biggest hero, but yet also hasn't succeeded in his mission. And more importantly, as those 3 days progress, he discovers that there's a conspiracy afoot and he may not have to go back and die after all. It's got a little bit, of kind of parallax view and 3 Days of the Condor in there as well, so, but all packaged in a kind of militarized Back to the Future.
Well, I cannot wait to see what you do next. You've been very generous with your time. Drew, thanks for talking to us today.
I appreciate your time so much.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to screenwriter Drew Pearce for being so generous with his time and coming down for a long chat about The Fall Guy. And I hope we have Drew back in the podcast sometime soon. It shouldn't be another decade before we see him again. But folks, The Fall Guy is in theaters right now. It's a hilarious roller coaster ride of a film. I hope you go see it because it's a fun big screen experience. Of course, I want to again thank today's sponsors of screencraft.org, finaldraft.com, and Backstory Magazine. And I hope you visit these sites. If you go over to screencraft.org, you'll find video lectures, career coaching opportunities, and plenty of genre-specific contests to enter. Their next contest is the Action Adventure Screenplay Competition, and it's open until June 30th, 2024. And if you want to save money on your entry, you could use discount coupon code QAPodcast, and that will save you 10% on a standard entry. So there's plenty to explore over at Screencraft, so what are you waiting for? Go check out screencraft.org today. But of course, before you enter screenplay competition, you gotta write your screenplay first, and what better way to do it than on Final Draft? They recently released Final Draft 13. It is the premier screenwriting software used by over 95% of the film and television community, and there's a special sale going on right now. If you visit finaldraft.com, you could purchase their latest version, Final Draft 13, or upgrade to it and save 25% on your purchase. You don't need a discount coupon code. You just need to visit finaldraft.com on or before May 6th because this deal ends on May 6th. And when you go to checkout, that discount of 25% will automatically apply in your cart. So remember, Final Draft makes formatting a screenplay easy so that you could focus on what you do best, the writing. I hope you visit finaldraft.com today. And while you're surfing around online, I hope you also, of course, check out Backstory Magazine. Yes, our Oscar issue is still live as our current issue here in May, but you know what? We've been updating it continuously. So we're updating it with a great interview for Star Wars Bad Batch, and that season just completed. There's going to be in the very near future a Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes article that takes you behind the scenes. These are all spoiler-specific articles that we've had to wait until these things come out so we can really take you in depth behind the scenes. So if you've never read us before, you could check us over at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And over there, you could read our free issue. It's a full issue. And if you like what you see, and I hope you do, you could consider becoming a subscriber. And if you want to become a subscriber, I'm here to offer you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription or even a gift subscription. So look, it really would mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners in iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2024. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to drop me a line, you could reach me anytime by writing to backstoryletters@gmail.com. I'll do my darndest to answer those emails as they come in. Or you could follow me on social media. I'm Yo Goldsmith on Twitter or Backstory_magazine on Twitter, which I know is now called X. I also have a Facebook fan page, so I'm a pretty easy guy to get a hold of. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.